Welcome back for another Share for Studying video. I hadn't planned on making a video today, but sometimes in the course of medical education, something important happens that demands urgent analysis and commentary, and this feels like one of those times. So today I'm going to rise to the challenge, I'm going to dig deep, and I'm going to deliver to you a special edition emergency mailbag answering your questions on the USMLE cheating scandal. In case you missed it, here's what happened. Earlier this week, the USMLE announced that they were invalidating the test scores of a number of examinees who were suspected of cheating. Let me quote from their official announcement. The USMLE program regularly monitors and analyzes examinees' test performance for unusual score patterns or variations and other information that could raise questions about the validity of an examinee's results. As part of an ongoing investigation, the USMLE program has identified a pattern of anomalous exam performance associated with Nepal, which challenges the validity of the test results for a group of examinees. Highly irregular patterns can be indicative of prior unauthorized access to secure exam content. Examinees with results in question are being notified that their previous step scores have been invalidated and they will be required to take a validation exam. The USMLE program is working to notify examinees who need to schedule validation exams and to support score users and other stakeholders impacted by the validation exam requirements. So naturally, both the nature and the timing and the far-reaching implications of this announcement, they generated a lot of discussion, and they filled my replies and DMs and inbox with questions. So let's dig into it. First up, what are USMLE recalls? Much of the online discussion on this issue that I've seen asserts, or at least assumes, that USMLE recalls were the way that these examinees were cheating. Now, notice that the USMLE's official announcement didn't say that. It didn't say anything about USMLE recalls or the exact nature of the cheating that occurred. It says only that they identified, quote, a pattern of anomalous exam performance, end quote. But because I heard this question from a couple of US-based faculty members, I'm going to answer it in good faith, both for them and for any other sweet summer children who are unaware of this practice. Broadly speaking, USMLE recalls are a forbidden type of test prep that consists of actual USMLE questions, as many as an examinee can recall, that are written down and packaged and sold to other examinees who are going to be taking the test in the future. It's forbidden because part of the agreement you make when you sign up to take one of these high-stakes exams is that you're not going to share the exam materials with anyone else. But in reality, it's something that occurs frequently, and it's done all around the world. There's a perception that it occurs more frequently in certain parts of the world than others, but there have been highly publicized examples of this even in the United States, such as in 2012 when CNN did an investigative report on US residency programs that were providing exam recalls to their residents before they took the American Board of Radiology exam. Now, some of these recalls are small and local and only shared within a peer group of classmates, but over the past few years, there have developed a number of businesses that have consolidated and commoditized these recalls. And from time to time, someone messages me about this. And I've actually thought in the past about posting or writing about this, but I've always decided not to because I didn't want to give these people free advertising. And so for that reason, I'm not going to screenshot or link to the actual recalls here. If you're interested in finding them, they're not that hard to find. There are Facebook groups and Telegram groups and ads and posts that tell you how to get in touch with the purveyors through WhatsApp or email. The prices are variable. I Googled up a little bit this week and I saw prices ranging from $200 to over $1,000 advertised, depending on what you were trying to buy. And even more variable than the price is the quality. Some of these recalls include reasonably well recalled questions that get formatted as such. Here's an example of that. It's from one of those ABR recalls that I mentioned a moment ago. So here you go. Question 5. 24-year-old male with gynecomastia. Testicle ultrasound demonstrates a 2-centimeter hypoechoic intratesticular mass. Which of the following is the most likely etiology? And all of this is typed and formatted neatly, and the correct answer, Leydig cell carcinoma, is highlighted. But a lot of these recalls are really very low quality. Actually, before this story broke, a reporter from Medscape was working on a story about it, and she contacted me and had me look at one of these entry-level USMLE recalls to see if it was legitimately USMLE questions. And honestly, I was shocked at how poor the quality was. I mean, most of the questions that were there were incompletely recalled at best, or you could tell that the person that recalled the item, they recalled it because they were confused and they really didn't know the right answer. And the document itself was a mess. It was a mix of unformatted typed words and then handwritten annotations on top of it. And a lot of the stuff was so impossibly vague that it provided just the barest representation of what the actual question was about. I mean, there were entries like, and I'm going to quote here, quote, ovarian teratoma laparoscopy, end quote, or quote, Wiscott Aldrich to diagnose, end quote. I mean, what are you going to do with that? I mean, honestly, I feel that someone who chooses to study something like that is probably going to achieve negative returns versus the counterfactual of simply spending your time studying a reputable USMLE review book like First Aid for the USMLE. But enough about that. Let me move on to the next question. How did the cheaters get caught? And here, I got to be honest, this is not an actual question that I received. And I actually try hard in these mailbags to use only real questions from real readers and listeners. But this is how I'm going to choose to distill down a bunch of different questions, such as, how is it fair to invalidate someone's USMLE score just because it's anomalously high? Or do I have to worry that my legitimately earned USMLE score is going to be invalidated just because I'm an international medical graduate or because I took the test in Nepal? Or, well, what if you use USMLE recalls alongside regular study materials? How would anyone ever know? So I'm going to answer all those questions and maybe some others by answering this broad question instead. So to answer this question, how the cheaters got caught, it's actually really simple. The answer is math. It should be plainly obvious that what the National Board of Medical Examiners is an organization that makes tests. It is not a multinational police force or paramilitary organization. They're not going to bust in the door of your apartment at dawn to see if that thing you're looking at is first aid for the USMLE or some illegal USMLE recall. They don't have any police powers or sophisticated electronic surveillance, but they don't have to have all that to know that you've cheated using a USMLE recall. So let me tell you what I strongly suspect happened in this situation. And I'm just a guy making a YouTube video. I don't have any inside information. I don't work for the USMLE, but I do hear things from time to time. And a few months ago, I began to hear from different people who were telling me about cheating involving USMLE recalls in Nepal. And obviously, they weren't telling this just to me. After the news broke this week, someone directed me to some old Reddit posts from back in the summer where people were discussing and complaining about how there seems to be an unusually high number of very high scores from that area. And so I think it's very likely that someone tipped off the USMLE about all this as well. And once someone tells the USMLE where to look, or actually, even if the people at USMLE know how to work a Google machine, well, then they can see these USMLE recalls being sold and they can buy them themselves. Their money is just as good as anybody else's. They would be the first person to make a fake profile and pretend to be someone they're not on the World Wide Web. It's not like the sellers give a rip who they're selling to anyhow. And so I think at a certain point, when the USMLE did this, they discovered something that I heard about, which was a USMLE recall that was not the ovarian teratoma laparoscopy quality. Instead, it contained complete USMLE questions. And quite clearly, those questions were not simply recalled by someone who was reminiscing about their exam. They indicate that there had been an exam security breach at the exam center. It's rare, but this kind of thing occurs from time to time. It's obviously easier if you have a confederate at the testing center, a proctor that you can pay and incentivize to look the other way. But this kind of stuff has happened even in the United States with full security procedures in place. You don't believe me? Let me give you an example. A few years ago, the AAMC sued a guy who took the MCAT at a test center in Atlanta. And when this guy showed up, he was wearing these big, wide-rimmed glasses, and he got past security initially. These just my spectacles, man. But then when somebody looked closer at them later during one of the exam breaks, they noticed that these were camera glasses with a little button near the temple that you could push to take a digital photo of whatever you were looking at. And sure enough, when they looked back at the video, there he was, thoughtfully looking at questions and tapping on his glasses near the temple. And the funny thing was, although they happened to catch him in this instance, when they looked back, they saw that this same guy had taken the MCAT 3 times before. And each time he finished the exam way early, and he only answered about 25% of the questions correctly, with no improvement in his score between his exam attempts, which pretty clearly is not the pattern of performance that one might see for someone who's actually trying to gain entry into medical school. So, for any of you out there telling me that this is impossible because Prometric security is so good, or that I'm trying to take a shot at Nepal by questioning their exam security, this little anecdote is for you. But back to my point. Once the USMLE knows which test items have been compromised, this is how they find the cheaters. They look at everyone's exam performance on the compromised items, and they compare it to their exam performance on the non-compromised items. There will be some variation, sure, but the amount of random variation obeys the laws of mathematics and probability, so you can easily calculate the likelihood that an examinee, just by chance alone, could have a difference as much as the one that you observed. This method was first described 15 years ago after the Medical Council of Canada had an exam breach. You can read about it in this paper, or actually, I'll just read to you a brief section from that article about what they did and why. Here's a quote. The Medical College of Canada often receives copies of ghost banks that claim to contain multiple choice questions from the MCC QE Part 1. These questions are typically poorly written, seldom have the same structure as MCC questions. For example, many do not have 5 response options, and they may have incorrect answers identified as being correct. At best, these ghost banks may capture the gist of content used in the examinations, but seldom contain literal copies of questions that are used on the examinations. That said, the MCC always investigates these ghost banks to examine the similarity between the questions and those used on the MCC. In 2004, the MCC was alerted to the fact that a number of questions were being sold via the internet. Upon investigation, it became apparent that unlike other ghost banks, these questions were literal copies of the multiple choice questions used by the MCC, and a security breach involving content from the MCC examinations had occurred. And they go on then to describe the math, which, like I suggested, is really pretty simple. It involves calculating a z-statistic for the difference between the examinee's subscore on the exposed versus the unexposed items. And in this case, they used a 5 standard deviation cutoff, so the chance that you would get a false positive was less than 1 in 1,000. So this is how the USMLE found the cheaters. So to get back to the original questions, no, your score is not going to get invalidated just because it's high. And as long as you didn't use actual USMLE questions to study, I really don't think you have anything to worry about. I saw a screenshot posted online of one of the emails that the USMLE sent notifying examinees that their score had been invalidated. And this particular email quoted to that examinee a probability of their testing results under normal testing conditions being extremely low, which the USMLE estimated in this email to be at 1 in 100 million or even more unlikely. Next question. Will my USMLE score change because this cheating raised the exam curve? The answer here is no. If you want to know more about how the 3-digit USMLE score is calculated, I got a whole other video on that and I'll link to it in the notes below. But basically, it involves comparing an examinee's performance on the exam to the performance of a previous reference group of examinees. 2 important things about that. First, notice that I said previous reference group of examinees. The people who take the USMLE at the same time that you do, they do not impact your score. Second, the reference group of examinees includes only first-time test takers at LCME accredited medical schools, which means MD granting medical schools in the United States and Canada. It does not include international medical graduates or DOs or repeat test takers. So any variation in the number of IMGs or DOs or repeat test takers or any change in the performance for those groups, it does not change the way that the USMLE is graded. So no, unless you were caught up in the cheating scandal, your USMLE score is not going to change. Next question. Will this cheating scandal hurt international medical graduates who didn't cheat? And here, sadly, I think the answer is yes. Cheating hurts all IMG applicants in at least two ways. The first is the more cheating there is, the more cheating there's going to be, because residency selection is a competitive endeavor. And because your USMLE score is one of the ways that you win in that endeavor. And so when some people start cheating and they gain advantage from it, it starts putting pressure on everybody else to do the same thing. It's just like steroids in Major League Baseball a few years ago or track and field. Until the people who cheat are punished and removed from the competition, you're going to have more and more people who maybe weren't inclined to cheat initially, but they feel like they've got to just to keep up. If that's how the game's going to be played, then you better start playing that way, if you want to win, or maybe you just like losing. And in the wake of the USMLE's announcement, a lot of the discourse on social media has been complaining about how Nepal has been singled out unfairly, or arguments about how there's cheating everywhere and it's even worse in such and such country. And for the record, let me say, I don't think for a minute that cheating is isolated to Nepal. And I also don't think that all Nepali medical students cheat. Let me say that clearly. But let me also state, again for the record, that unless the USMLE is aggressive in stopping cheating, this problem will continue to spread to other areas and intensify in areas in which it's already occurring. Cheating begets more cheating. So the second way that cheating hurts international medical graduates is that the more cheating there is, the more program directors start to look suspiciously at any IMG with high scores. And that's especially true for applicants who come from parts of the world where there's open discussion about cheating occurring there. But really, it's something that tarnishes all international medical graduates, because for some program directors who see a 275 on Step 2 CK, they're going to wonder, if I interview and rank this person, is there going to come some time in the future when the other shoe drops? I mean, are they going to get here and bomb their in-training exam or bang around on the wards like a bull in a china shop because they don't actually know what they're doing? The fact that some people's high scores were attained by cheating is unfortunately going to raise doubts in some program directors' heads. I'm not saying that's fair, but if you ask me a question, I'm going to give you an honest answer. So to anyone out there who's complaining about how Nepali students got singled out, I think you're missing the big picture. If you're an international medical graduate from anywhere, you want the USMLE to act aggressively and authoritatively in these situations. You need USMLE scores to be trustworthy and untainted because it hurts the IMGs who are playing fair more than anyone else. Let's move on to another question. What's going to happen to these examinees? My answer is, it depends. The consequences here are serious, and for some people, those consequences are going to be devastating. But actually, I think some people are going to land on their feet. Let me explain what I mean. Here's the official statement from the Educational Commission for Foreign Medical Graduates. They got the list of affected examinees from the USMLE, and they basically say that because passing USMLE Step 1 and Step 2 CK is required for ECFMG certification, anyone who had one of those scores invalidated is no longer ECFMG certified. And that's a problem because the match requires ECFMG certification to participate. So some of the people who have just wrapped up a seemingly very successful interview season and they were getting ready to make their rank order list, now they're not going to be able to do that. So what happens next for them? Well, if you were paying attention to that original USMLE announcement, you saw that these examinees are going to be required to take a validation exam. So they're going to have to retake the test. A lot of the chatter online, I think, has sort of missed this point, or they haven't really thought it through fully. They're going to take the test again. And obviously, I think the USMLE is going to take great care to give them a test with the freshest, cleanest questions that they have in their entire databank so they can really gauge their performance on non-contaminated items. But still, out of fairness, they've got to give these examinees some time to study and prepare. I mean, even somebody who got a 275, honestly, they're not going to score 275 if they had to take the test cold 6 months later. So they're going to get a chance to study, and it's possible, not likely, but possible, that some of these examinees, with their entire career on the line, they're going to crank out a 275 again. And even if they don't, if they get a respectable score, they could be right back in the application pool next year with a 245 or a 255 or whatever on their USMLE transcript. Now, if you actually looked at their USMLE transcript, then you would see that they had a previous test date along with the notation score not available. But I promise you, some residency programs are going to miss this. This is what the new ARIS graphical user interface looks like. This is what the programs see. In the old days, ARIS listed all of an examinee's USMLE attempts. But the new version of ARIS, when you go to the exams and licenses tabs, which I've got right here, it only lists the most recent USMLE attempt. So if you want to see the full USMLE transcript, you've got to click on the Documents tab, and then you got to click again on the USMLE transcript, which will then open up the PDF. So in this example, if all I look at is the Exams tab in ARIS, then I would see that this applicant passed USMLE Step 1 and scored 259 on Step 2 CK. But if I pulled up their USMLE transcript, if I pulled up the actual PDF, it's possible that I might learn that, I don't know, maybe they actually failed their first attempt at Step 1. Because all I can see is their most recent attempt, which was a pass on this screen. And obviously programs know this. So for the majority of programs, the program director or the program coordinator, they painstakingly click around and they look at the USMLE transcript for applicants that they're seriously evaluating. And if they do that for one of these applicants next year, they're going to discover that previous attempt and they're going to see score not available. What's that mean? Never seen that before. And if they didn't know, they're going to Google it and they're going to learn that it means that something fishy happened. And I think it's likely at that point that their interest in that applicant's going to cool off considerably. But look, programs are overrun with thousands of applications. And I'm telling you, not every single program is going to do this. So like I said at the beginning, some of these folks, not everybody, but some of these folks are going to land on their feet. Now, what about the people who are already in residency? Things are going to be even messier for them because if you're not ECFMG certified, you're not eligible to train in an ACGME accredited residency program. So I don't think these people will be eligible to work until their certification gets reinstated. And many residency programs, I think, are going to start the process of cutting ties with these residents right then and there. If you lose your ECFMG certification, you're also liable to lose your visa if you're here on a J1. So some of these folks may get deported. And again, that's going to be the end of their residency career in the United States. But some program directors, they're softies. You know, maybe they like the resident, or maybe they worry about the appearance of the program dismissing a resident. You know, or maybe the resident comes to them with tears rolling down their cheeks and says, "I don't know how this happened. I, I swear I didn't cheat." Or maybe you just have a battle-wizened program director who knows that it's hard to fire a resident who's smart and doesn't want to go. And that program director recognizes that you have to let the processes and appeals play out and make sure that you cross all your T's and dot your I's. So for whatever reason, in some circumstances, the program's going to say, all right, we'll hold your spot and we'll see what happens with your retake. And what happens then? Well, remember, you don't need a 280 to be ECFMG certified. If you simply pass the test, you're going to get your certification back. And that by itself might be enough to get you out of hot water. But what if, what if you pass, but you get a much lower score than your original score? What's the program going to do then? If they haven't already moved to dismiss the resident, there actually might not be much they can do. Please recall, as I've discussed multiple times on this channel and elsewhere, that USMLE scores are not a terribly precise measurement. If a given examinee took the USMLE over and over using different sets of items that cover similar content, but every time they take the test, we reset their mind back to what they knew at the beginning of the test, so they aren't ever learning new material or forgetting old material. Even under this contrived, ideal set of circumstances, if you made a histogram of a person's scores, that histogram will be centered around the score that's their true ability, but the spread around it is going to be wide. The 95% confidence interval spans a 24-point range, and the 99% confidence interval spans a 36-point range. So let's say that that resident came into the program with an apparent 270. And that was the whole reason that you interviewed and ranked them in the first place, was that 270. And then they take their retake and they come back with a 234. Their score dropped from around the 95th percentile to around the 15th percentile. So the program director might say, yeah, I knew that guy was cheating, and even worse, he lied to me. Remember that crocodile tears? He was crying in my office. I want this guy out of here. But if the resident wants to fight it, at many institutions, they can. They can point out correctly that it's possible for someone whose true ability is around a 252 to score a 270 one day and a 234 the next. It's highly unlikely, but it's certainly not impossible. And again, that difference that I'm showing you in this graphic here, that's under ideal circumstances. And the resident could again point out to the appeals committee that these were hardly ideal circumstances that they were taking their retest under because they were dealing with the stress of being called a cheater and they were facing deportation and whatever else. And maybe the appeals committee will see through that. But knowing a little bit about how many big medical institutions work, I think it's very plausible that they'll do what administrators do, and they'll say, well, we can't kick him out because he has a passing score and he's now ECFMG certified again, and we don't actually have a policy that allows us to dismiss a resident under this specific circumstance. So getting back to the original question, one way or another, most of these folks are screwed, but not all of them. Like I said before, I really do think that some of these examinees are going to land on their feet in the United States. And even if they don't, they'll probably land on their feet elsewhere. And on the one hand, that's fine. As a matter of personal principle, I believe in redemption, and I believe that people deserve second chances. And I don't wish these people any ill will. But as a matter of fairness, it's hard to justify giving a cheater a second chance when their actions kept someone who didn't cheat from getting there first. And I'm going to say one other thing too. Although it should be kind of obvious, it's clear to me from some of the discussions online that it's not. So I'm going to say this outright. The purpose of United States residency training is not to lift people out of poverty so that they can change their family tree. The purpose of residency training is to train physicians who will provide the best possible care to patients. And those patients aren't just some substrate for earning a comfortable living in a more prosperous part of the world. They're real human beings who are going to come to you in a time of need, and they deserve the best that you can offer them. And similarly, the purpose of the United States licensing exam is not to provide some system for social mobility. It's to ensure that you actually know enough to help these patients when they need you. The end product of residency training is a licensed physician who makes decisions that impact people's lives. And if you're cheating on the USMLE, I don't think that you quite understand the gravity of that. Last question. What should the USMLE do about this in the future? I got a few thoughts here. First, like I said before, I applaud the USMLE for doing this. I think they should do it more for all the reasons that I said. This is not a problem that's isolated to Nepal, and it hurts everyone. Second, I think the USMLE needs to acknowledge that no matter how many people they catch or punish, USMLE scores are so valuable that there will continue to be a strong incentive for new cheaters to emerge. So I think they need to do things that make it harder to cheat. Now here, I think that the security at test centers is usually pretty good. I mean, sure, all it takes is one slick test taker wearing his glasses or one shady proctor to breach the system. But I think that those things occur rarely, and it's probably impossible to get that number down to zero. I think the bigger issue is with these USMLE recalls. And unfortunately, there's no way that you can create a security procedure that's going to keep examinees from leaving Prometric without a memory of what they've actually seen stuck in their head. But what you can do is diminish the value of that information. If you turn over test questions more rapidly, instead of just letting them sit around in the exam for 5 years, you diminish the value of these USMLE recalls. And of course, I realize there's a lot of work that goes into developing and validating USMLE questions, and some part of that can't be rushed. But I also recognize that we live in a world with incredible computing power, and it seems to me that we should be able to generate questions a little bit more rapidly than we did in 1984. Can we use AI to recycle the concept of each question, but maybe change the aspects of the question in such a way that it's not immediately recognizable? That feels like something we ought to be able to do. Or better yet, can we use short answer questions or free response questions to better assess what's going on in an examinee's head? I talked a little bit before about how that's very likely to come out in the USMLE in the future. That was in my score creep video. And if that occurs, that's going to help with this problem. You can also use computers and math to identify questions that are starting to get compromised because that's a major problem. All you have to do is look at when you first introduced a question. Let's say the first year you run it, maybe 65% of people get it right. But then the second year, it's up to 69%. And then the next year, it's 73%. Well, you might want to retire that question because people are using it to falsely inflate their overall score. Some questions, because of the way that they're phrased or the use of an image, they're more memorable than others, and they probably have a shorter shelf life. And so you ought to monitor this. And actually, when you find items where the performance on that item seems to be increasing, you could look closer and you could see what's driving that increase and where in the world it's occurring. Because if it's not uniform, that may give you further reason to yank the question and a clue about where you need to look at what's going on. The last thing I'm going to say is that the USMLE should not be afraid to be somewhat transparent about what they're doing. Sure, you don't want to give tips or reveal your methods to people who are cheating and make it easier for them to cheat. But I think you also shouldn't be afraid to bare your teeth. So I'm going to close with this. There was an old piece in BMJ 20 years ago that discussed a local cheating scandal, and the editor excoriated a medical school that had buried a cheating scandal. And they said, and this is the phrase that resonated with me, that justice must be done, but it also must be seen to have been done. I really think that 99% of people out there want a fair system. And I think that to get there, justice must be done and seen to be done. And that's all I've got. Thanks for listening.